Now, let's take a look at a more realistic example of creating a custom metric. And whenever you're trying to create a custom metric, you kind of need to understand what you're trying to achieve by that custom metric and if it's not already covered by the default metrics in K6. Now, to create a custom metric, you need some information. And typically, the main source of information is the response itself. So now I'm here at the K6 documentation page and I'm looking at the response. And you'll see here that the response has various properties. For example, we can get some information from the body. There are cookies. There are also some errors that are being tracked in the response. There are headers. And probably also very interesting, there is also information about some timings. So essentially, performance timing information for the HTTP request. Now, in the default report, we get this timing information, but for all requests. Now, let's imagine that we want to send multiple requests, and only for a single request, we want to have some dedicated reporting in terms of timings. And we want to understand that because this is some super important page and really need to make sure that this page is super fast, is going very well, and we want to have that in our report. So in order to do that, we're going to use here from the timings, we're going to take a look at the property which is called timings duration. So this is essentially the entire duration of the request. Good. So how can we do this in K6? Let's take a look. So in K6, essentially what we want to use is another metric type, which is called a trend. So if we go here to the import, we're going to have to write comma and import trend. So now we have access to the trend, which means that we can now create a new custom metric. So let's say, for example, we want to use the news page. So if I'm going here to the test.k6.io website, we're going to see here that we have a news page. So let's imagine that we want to do something with this news page. So I want to copy here the address, and I'm just going to paste it here as a comment, just to have it for a second. So let's go ahead and name our timer something like news page response trend. So we can define this variable named as it is. And again, with a new keyword, this time we're going to use trend. This is of something that represents a trend over time. So we can also name here the name of the variable response time news page with underscores. Right, so we have done here the first step. Now, how can we actually start populating this metric with something useful? So again, we're going to reference the variable, and we need to first, of course, send the request, right? So we need to use here news page response trend.add, but we need some data here, right? So this is missing here. We don't have it yet. So in order to do this, we're going to need to submit another request. So we're going to use here res, where we're going to store the information. We can use http.get, and inside get, we can simply put this address. Now be careful when you're reusing a variable. In this case, I've defined this as a constant, and a constant in JavaScript cannot be reassigned with a different value. So we need to change that to let. This way we can reuse the response. We are doing something here with the response, and then later on we're reusing the same variable because we don't want to define something like response 2 or so. Anyway, so now I have here the response. We have sent the request, we have the response, and then from the response, we can use here res dot. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to get to the timings. We're going to write here timings dot. What are we interested in? In the duration. So now instead of just, for example, adding like 1, which makes sense for a counter, we are actually providing to this metric and to K6 the timing duration for this particular request only, right? So this is super important. We are doing this only for this request. Let's also do here the slips. So we're doing the first request, we're slipping 1 second, then we're doing the second request, we're slipping once again. So let's see what is happening when we're doing this. Is running right now. So I'm going to take a look here in a few seconds at the report. And what we're going to see here is now we have here my counter, which was the previous custom metric that we had. And now we have the response time news page. So we have information for the news page. And as you can see here, it is pretty similar to how HTTP request duration looks like because it is of type trend. So it tracks all this average, mean, median, max, percentiles, and so on. So now that we have created this metric, and this is only for the news page, then we can, of course, go here in the thresholds and define something specific only for this. So we always need to make sure that we have the exact name. And we can go to the threshold that we are expecting here. For example, the 95th percentile, what we have here, should be below 150 milliseconds. So we can go ahead and write that as a condition. It should be below 150. And of course, I need to put it between quotes here. Okay, so let's see if this works as expected. So we're getting here our check mark. We can see that the 95th percentile is indeed under 150 milliseconds. And we can even write additional conditions. So for example, there's nothing stopping us from adding a secondary condition, which could be the 99th percentile. And we can say that the 99th percentile needs to be below 200 milliseconds. So let's see if this works. So we can write multiple conditions. And we can see that this one is passing as well. Even if it's not displayed in the report by default by K6, this metric is still being tracked, so we can use it here. So in a nutshell, this is how you can create a different type of a custom metric, get some information from the response, pass it on to the metric using the add method, and finally using the thresholds to keep an eye on that metric to make sure that it is essentially what you expect it to be.